Hello, everyone. Welcome to Prologue. I apologize for our clunky little start there. We're having a few glitches with our Zoom tonight. But first, I want to welcome you to Prologue on behalf of WHQR Public Media. And I'm excited for this evening's, I don't want to say non-literary, but we're taking a little different turn on Prologue tonight. So to get us started, I'm going to introduce Ben Steelman. Come on in, Ben.
Thank you, Mary. Our speaker tonight is a former he is still a Keenan Professor Emeritus in Sociology at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. He retired after a distinguished career that included stints as a visiting fellow at All Souls College, Oxford, and president of the Southern Historical Association. He's the author of a shelf of academic books, including The Enduring South and Glorious Battle. However, since his retirement in 2000, he has been devoting himself to culinary skills. And in fact, when Calvin Trillin wrote an essay about Southern barbecue for the New Yorker, John and his late wife Dale were the primary sources. John is the author of Holy Smoke, the History of North Carolina Barbecue, published by the University of North Carolina Press, and Barbecue, a cookbook in its the UNC Press's Savor the South recipe. And he is now the author of On Barbecue, just published by the University of Tennessee Press. And he would be remiss if I did not mention that he is the official Eminence Grease, Grease, of the Campaign for Real Barbecue. Please welcome John Shelton Reed. Dr. Reed, it is a pleasure to have you tonight. And disclosure, I am a former student. So I'll have to be very respectful here.
Yeah, it's always good to see my former students grown up. I mean, I still think of you as 20 years old, but
well, I'm 40 years older, but I don't know if I'm grown up yet. But anyway.
Now, you misspoke on one thing. I was president of the Southern Sociological Society, not the Southern
Sociological Society. I do apologize.
My historian jump on that. But,
anyway, you are a proud native of Kingsport, Tennessee, as I remember. And one irony of this is that you did not grow up in a barbecue tradition.
That's right.
Now, you did not taste barbecue until you got into Durham, North Carolina in the 1960s. I'll let you tell the story.
Pretty much the case. I've got a lot about it in the book, actually. East Tennessee, and for that matter, Western North Carolina, Southwest Virginia, Southeast Kentucky, that whole Southern Highlands area, something of a barbecue desert when it comes to restaurants. Now, they were having community barbecues well into the 20th century. I guess I could have gone to one of those if I'd heard about it, but Borden Mills had a big pit barbecue for its employees, and Martha Washington College had a barbecue to raise money for a swimming pool, and various politicians had barbecues to collect crowds, but it never made the transition as it did elsewhere in the South to barbecue restaurants. And there's starting to be some now, and I've got a good deal in there about what's going on in Western North Carolina, which all sorts of things popping up these days, but it's all been in recent years. There's one place in East Tennessee near where I grew up, and it's been there since 1947, but that's venerable by East Tennessee standards. And it's idiosyncratic. They have their own their own style of barbecue that's unlike anything anywhere else. The family that runs it, or ran it, the lady who ran it, the family that runs it, ran into barbecue in Alabama on a trip to Florida and came back and started cooking their own version of it. So anyway, the Highlands are unusual in that they don't have a lot of barbecue restaurants, or didn't until recently. So my late wife, Dale, went to Duke, and we'd gone together in high school. I went over to visit her in Durham, and she took me to a place called Turnage's in Durham, which cooked whole hogs. The guy that ran it was from Farmville. Cooked whole hogs over wood, Eastern Carolina style. Durham's kind of on the fault line, so they can go either way, Eastern or Piedmont. But this was definitely Eastern. And it was a great place. I loved the food. I loved the people. I loved the scene. They had long tables. They served the stuff family style. They brought it out and platters and you helped yourself. They had Kay Kaiser's old piano, and they had Kay Kaiser's old piano player came in from time to time, played the piano. But alternatives, it's a great loss. It was still running when we moved back to North Carolina. I took a job at UNC in 1969, and we went there for the next 7 or 8 years until it did close finally. I was sorry to see it go. But anyhow, that was my introduction to barbecue. And you know, a good while later, Dale, my wife, and I wrote this book called Holy Smoke about North Carolina barbecue. Coming as we did from East Tennessee, gave us a kind of advantage, I guess, in that we didn't have to take sides in this Eastern Piedmont dispute. People
Civil War, some would say. Okay, for the benefit of folks from other parts of the country, let us explain very quickly the difference between Eastern barbecue and the bad satanic kind.
Okay. Yeah, I shouldn't assume that people know this. In Eastern North Carolina and the adjoining part of the Petey region of South Carolina, people cook barbecue pretty much the way it had been cooked from time immemorial, or you know, from the 1700s. They cook in whole animals, whole hogs, for the most part, almost exclusively in recent years, hogs over wood fire, and they're dousing it with they call it a sauce, but it's more of a seasoning, which is basically vinegar, red pepper, and salt, and not much else. You know, a pinch of this, a pinch of that, more for mystique than anything else. About 100 years ago, a little bit more than 100 years ago, in the Piedmont, Lexington, and Salisbury region, some guys started messing with that. They started cooking just shoulders, not whole hogs, and they started putting a little bit of ketchup in the sauce. Now, people in the East like to say it's a tomato-based sauce in the Piedmont. It's not. It's a vinegar-based sauce, but it's got tomato in it, and that little tincture of tomato has caused a lot of grief. I mean, people take sides in the barbecue wars.
Who was it who said that anybody who put ketchup on their barbecue will do just about anything?
Yeah, people put ketchup on barbecue and feed it to a child capable of anything. That was the late Dennis Rogers of the News and Observer, a great columnist and a true loyalist when it came to Eastern North Carolina barbecue. But when we were promoting Holy Smoke, people would ask us which we preferred, and our stock answer was whichever one's never, you know, because I like them both, and I'll go for convenience. But if they really pushed us, I would have to say that I preferred the Eastern style, partly because it takes so much skill to do it right. I mean, I can cook pork shoulders, you know. I'm scared to death to try to cook a whole hog. I need a lot of help to do it. Also, I'm a traditionalist, and it's got that whole weight of tradition behind it. It's been done that way for, you know, over 200 years, and so I kind of like that notion. Dale, on the other hand, she actually preferred the Piedmont style. If you pushed her and made her choose, she'd happily eat either one. And she liked outside brown, you know, the crunchy part, and you get more of that with shoulders than you do with whole hogs. Also, I don't think it's accidental that her maiden name was Wahlberg, and she comes from a long line of Germans. And I've got a lot in this book here. I attribute a lot of the localism of barbecue, the regional variety, to the presence or absence of Germans. The Piedmont area, if you look where you find Lutherans in North Carolina, it's the same place that people started cooking shoulders and putting ketchup in the vinegar-based sauce. And
then you've got all the Germans down in Texas where they think barbecue is done with cows.
You bet. That came out of the German and Czech butcher shops that you know, did it the way they did it in Germany and Czechoslovakia. They at the end of the day, they smoked what they had left over, and they didn't even call it barbecue until some black guys showed up from Alabama, you know, migrant workers, and started eating it. And they said, "Oh, this is barbecue." So these Germans, being practical businessmen, said, "Yes, it's barbecue." It's been barbecue ever since. But also in South Carolina, you've got a stretch from Columbia to Charleston where they have a peculiar, peculiar, I mean, in the sense of odd, but also peculiar in the sense of unique to them, sauce with ketchup in it. You know, other people put maybe a bit of ketchup. excuse me, that's ketchup, mustard in it. I beg your pardon. Other people may put a touch of mustard in, but not so much you can see it. In this part of South Carolina, the sauce is yellow, it's school bus yellow. It's alarming to look at.
And you mentioned Owensboro, Kentucky, which has always fascinated me, where they barbecue with lamb. Which just how did that happen?
Well, actually, more than lamb, it's mutton. It's old lamb. I used to say that never met style of barbecue I didn't like. Tell you the truth, I don't much care for Owens. I think you have to grow up with that, because I take lamb and square it. I don't know if you've ever eaten mutton. I haven't until I got to Owensboro. I like lamb, but the taste of lamb squared, I mean, it's very strong flavor. And they serve it with a sauce, a dip, they call it, which is mostly Worcestershire sauce. I said in one of my books that I think they do it to disguise the taste of the mutton. Anyway, there's two strong flavors, and I admire it because it's been there a long time, and God bless them for having their own style. But I'm glad it's not universal. I'll say that. Those are Germans too. You ask who's eating it. It's cooked at a lot of German Catholics there. They cook it at parish gatherings, and the old timers, here's the tip off, like to eat it with rye bread. So anyway, the Germans have a lot to do with several distinct styles of barbecue. The Deep South, there aren't any Germans, and the determining factor there, of course, is the presence of large numbers of African Americans, and they're the ones doing most of the cooking. Everybody eats it, but most of the cooking done by the Black folks. And there's a new book called Black Smoke by my friend Adrian Miller about African American barbecue, and he insists that there are differences between black and white barbecue. I'd always insisted there weren't, but he's persuaded me there probably are. And one of the differences is you're far more likely to get a thick, very sweet red sauce in black owned barbecue places. And that's what you get in Memphis, not surprisingly. It's what you get in Kansas City, which is basically an outpost of Memphis. A black guy from Memphis went up to Kansas City. I won't say quite living memory, but the early part of the 20th century. Started cooking barbecue up there. Kansas City barbecue is basically Memphis style with a few Texas licks thrown in, but it has a sweet red sauce. And they think barbecue is about sauce. I call that the Kansas City heresy. Texans, until recently, Central Texans, these German-derived places, they didn't put sauce in their barbecue. They said, I don't want to mess with the meat, so meat's good. Then they had Yankees started showing up and saying, where's the sauce? So being businessmen and as well as great barbecue cooks, they started putting out sauce a little grudgingly, but it's there if you want it. And in North Carolina too, Pete Jones at the Skylight Inn in Aden used to say, well, one thing he said, it's not cooked with wood, it's not barbecue. And he's right about that. But what my point here is he also said it's barbecue before the sauce goes on it. East Carolina sauce, that thin vinegar sauce, respects the meat. I think of it more as a seasoning than a sauce.
You call that the mother sauce, as I remember.
Yes, I do. Good for you, Ben. You did your homework, my student. I call it the mother sauce because it was universal. That Eastern North Carolina style was universal until the late 19th century. I mean, you use that vinegar, pepper, and salt sauce. You found it in Texas, you found it in Kentucky, you found it in Maryland, you found it everywhere.
Well, let me ask the other end of the spectrum. When do we start seeing the first signs of barbecue as a distinct tradition?
Well,
what's the earliest report?
Yeah, people everywhere, almost everywhere, for almost ever, have known that if you cook meat at a low temperature for a long time, it's a good way to cook tough, gnarly meat. So in medieval times, people were cooking animals over wood fire for a long time. You look at it, you say, well, they're barbecue. Southerners, I think, tend to think it's not barbecue unless you call it barbecue. So, in which case, and if you insist on some kind of sauce on it, first thing you get that's recognizable to most Southerners as barbecue would be in the West Indies in the 1600s, where the local Indians, well, when the Europeans got there, the Indians had this framework of sticks that they cooked on that they called the barbacoa. referring to the framework, but that word passed into English as barbecue. And soon in the Virginia colonies and the Carolinas, people were having what they called barbecues, which were basically hog roasts or sides of beef or something. They dig a trench, put sticks across it, put the animals on the sticks and cook it over a bed of coals. And those were called barbecues. And I've got a letter from a young guy in Virginia writing a friend back in London, explaining about how they had barbecues. He said, I don't suppose you know what that word means, but here's what we do. The pit barbecue, the community barbecue like that, was quite common in the 1700s. George Washington wrote about in his diaries about going to barbecues. He won 26 shillings or something like that at one barbecue, gambling. Great occasions for people to get together, to eat, to dance, drink, to gamble, to socialize. And sometimes,
I love that one. You had a letter from a Spanish diplomat where he was talking about going to a barbecue, and he was just amazed that rich and poor were all sidling in there, shoulder to shoulder, eating and
that's right.
and drinking and having a merry time together, just as if they'd been friends.
I don't know what this Spanish soldier was doing in New Bern, North Carolina, but he was there when news of the Treaty of Paris arrived, and they threw a big barbecue to celebrate it. And he said, they're standing around, they're drinking from the same cup, passing this loving cup around, and you never saw a more democratic sight in your life. He was just very bemused by this spectacle. And there's a story in Alabama. There was an anti-barbecue party started up in the early 19th century because they said these politicians are having barbecues, and these are wild scenes at which there's all kinds of bad stuff going on, drinking and gambling and who knows what else. And they said even the I forget how they put it, something like the tawny sons of Africa forget their chains. The black folks were at the barbecue and not behaving like enslaved people, or at least according to the white folks who were watching them. So this barbecue has been a great leveling factor, and I think for the good. And that's true. That's been true of the kind of need to use the word vernacular, but vernacular barbecue places that I grew up with, or didn't grow up with them in Tennessee, but that you grew up with in North Carolina, that I encountered when I came to North Carolina. These are small places, generally run by a family, often by somebody whose name's on the place. Every kind of person gathers there. My rule for finding a good barbecue place is if the sheriff is there, and you find policemen, you find teachers, you find insurance people, you find construction workers, you find, rich and poor all eating in this $3.50 sandwiches in the same place. And one of my complaints that I write about in the book was about the emergence of barbecue chains and what's sometimes called elevated barbecue, whereas it's going to cost you $12 or $15. I mean, sometimes it's a very good sandwich, don't get me wrong, and I've eaten them happily, but that's not the kind of place that's going to get a cross section of the community. It's going to get people like me. And sometimes I get tired of being with people like me.
Mary, do we have any questions from the audience yet?
Hi, guys. Yes, we do. Actually, and a reminder to folks who are watching, if you have questions for John, please put them in the Q&A and we will ask away. But I have one from Frank, and he wonders, in the greater Wilmington area, how many styles of barbecue can you sample and where do you recommend? Well,
I'm not all that familiar with your area, and off the top of my head, I'm trying to, as Ben said, I'm associated with something called the Campaign for Real Barbecue, because we noticed at some point that a majority of places, a large majority of places in North Carolina that are selling what they call barbecue no longer cook with wood. Okay, and I don't think there are any wood cooking places in your part of North Carolina anymore. So
the usual complaint is that they'd love to do it, but they've got all these health regulations and
Uh-huh.
everything, and it would be too expensive. And
Yeah.
they'd love to do it, but you've got progress and you just can't anymore.
Yeah, well, expensive maybe. I mean, cooking with gas is cheaper and it's easier. God knows you don't have to sit up all night, and it's more reliable. You know, if you're cooking with wood, you have good days and bad days. But to my mind, it doesn't taste the same, and also it's losing the skill involved. There are places coming along, and I write about this in the book as well, that are chains, basically, barbecue chains, and they usually operate on what I call the International House of Barbecue model. They'll have they'll have beef brisket, they'll have pork, they'll have chicken, they'll have ribs, they'll have all kinds of meats, and they'll have all kinds of sauces, you know, and you can mix and match, but it's whatever sauce you want on whichever kind of meat you want. I went to a place in Cary, North Carolina the other day, and I should have known there was a problem. I walked in the door, there was a picture of a hockey player on the wall. But they had, I think, 7 different sauces, none of them a North Carolina sauce. Well, you know Cary. Maybe you don't know Cary, but most of the people there are hockey fans who aren't from around here. You know, maybe not most of the people, but that's the market for this place.
There's a rude canard that Cary stands for Containment Area for Relocated Yankees.
Yeah. Well, there's some truth to that. You know, I remember when Cary had 7,000 people. What is it now? 90,000. It's shocking. I may be exaggerating, but I do remember when it was in 4 figures, the population, not that long ago. But anyway, I'm evading your Frank's question. I'm not really answering it because I'm not sure what the answer is. You know, I know there's a good place on Ocracoke that barbecues with wood from local fig trees. I mean, there are interesting.
You once referred to Wilbur's of Goldsboro as the mother church,
Yeah.
But Wilbur's is no longer with us. Is that not right?
Well, it closed and now it's reopened. That's a fairly heartening story. The Wilbur Shirley, who ran it, it was a really good barbecue, and it was an institution. People from this part of the state stopped there on their way to the beach, you know, and but then they built a bypass, and he didn't get the drop-in traffic that he used to get. You had to seriously detour to get to Wilbur's, and I did that after the bypass was built, and I was distressed to see there weren't that many people there for lunch. It used to be just jammed. And shortly after that, he got in trouble with the tax people, and they closed him down. Some local folks in Goldsboro said, this is not right. I mean, this is an institution. This is part of what our town is about. So they raised money, paid off the taxes, bought the place basically, and put him in it as Avanos Grease, sort of advisor, and work the front of the house and say hello to people. So that was a happy story. They brought it back. He died not too long after that, but he saw it back. Wilbur, incidentally, if I may say so, was one of the last yellow dog Democrats in North Carolina. He had a picture of FDR on the wall of his place. And if Hillary Clinton had known what she was doing in the barbecue line of things, she'd have gone to Wilbur's to eat barbecue, and he'd have been delighted to see her. As it was, she went to a place in Charlotte called the Midwood Smokehouse, which is, it's good smoked meat, but it's not North Carolina barbecue. It's kind of the International House of Barbecue. It has a guy called an executive chef. I mean, this is just not how you get in touch with deep North Carolina.
I will note in chat that one of our listeners put in a vote for Parchees, which I will admit has a very excellent takeout and catering service of long repute.
All right. Well, at the risk of losing all credibility, I have to say I've not been there. So
Parchees is kind of almost the state of mind more than a location. But anyway, any more questions, Mary?
No, not at the moment, but just to further that, Suzanne, who mentioned that her dinner tonight was the last she had of Parchees, she froze it when David retired in April. and said it was so delicious. So I don't know if David was the pit master or whatever you call the executive chef, or the owner, or if Parchees is still open. I'm
I
not
hope
sure.
I haven't missed my chance. I may have missed my chance.
I missed it too.
Let me talk about two places kind of down your way. One is across the line in Hemingway, South Carolina, a place called Scott's Country Store, Scott's Store. The other is in Aden, Skylight Inn, run by the Jones family. Sam Jones is the third generation of the family in that business. And it's a funky place. I mean, somebody called it the capital of barbecue. So Pete Jones, who founded it, put a replica of the United States Capitol Dome on top of his barbecue. It's still there. And they serve whole hog barbecue cooked over wood, very good coleslaw, and corn pone. I mean, this is old school, not ours, but corn pone. And that was all they served until lately they started serving chicken, just because, I don't know, just because. I'm sorry in the way that they do. Sam Jones, the current scion of that family, realizes what he's inherited, and he is he has the skills to promote it. And he's been on television. He's been to New York cooking at the Big Apple Barbecue Block Party. He started a place in Raleigh and another place in Greenville, which are kind of new style barbecue places. You can get other things besides barbecue slaw and corn pone, including craft beer you can get, and the prices are higher. But if you order right, you get the same thing you get at Aden, and that's what I want. Anyway, Sam, Sam is this is a white family in Aden. Black family in Hemingway, the Scotts, their youngest generation is a guy named Rodney Scott, who same thing. He was cooking back in this backwater of Hemingway. Fundamentalist place. They cooked pork. They didn't have slaw. They had pork and white bread, and a very, very hot sauce. That's another story. Anyway, Rodney has opened a place in Charleston, and he too has been cooking in New York and going on the circuit around the country. And he too knows what he's inherited and is making the most of it and doing a very good job of it. He won the James Beard Award just recently. So and he's opened a place, I think now, he may have one in Atlanta. I know he's opening one in Birmingham. He's got some backing. And again, it's not like the country store. He's serving other things besides barbecue, and he's got liquor, which they don't have, or beer, liquor too, I think, actually. But anyway, it's a higher end thing. But these are two guys from PD, South Carolina, and Eastern North Carolina who are taking their tradition that they earned, they came by honestly, and they're spreading it around the South. And God bless them. Good luck to them. I like them both. They're both good guys.
I want to ask you about this. Isn't in on barbecue, but in Holy Smoke, you described in great detail how you and an associate actually dug and operated a barbecue pit in your backyard when you were still living near campus in Chapel Hill. And it always amazed me because I was amazed you got this past the local zoning officials.
We didn't talk to them, actually. Things were simpler back in the day, Ben. We didn't actually dig it either. We made it out of cinder blocks. So it was a raised pit. So we didn't have to bend over as far either. So, but it was the same principle. You put the hog on in our case, iron rods across the top of the cinder blocks with the coals underneath. You burn coals down in a barrel and you shovel them under the hog. And as I say, I had a lot of help because that takes a lot of skill. You need someone who really knows what he's doing, and I didn't. And it was my yard, my cinder blocks, but I was kind of an assistant in the cooking.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And one other item I have to raise. You mentioned you had a chapter in on barbecue from an essay that you've written on Wilmington's undying place in barbecue
Yes.
history back in 1766. Can you tell
Yeah.
us about that a little bit?
Yes. 1766. Now, everyone's heard about the Boston Tea Party, right? Which was 8 years later in Boston. These folks were upset about a tax on tea. So a bunch of guys dressed up as Indians and went through the tea in the harbor. That's celebrated, and there's a museum of it, all of this. 8 years earlier, in your neck of the woods in Wilmington, there were some guys upset about the Stamp Act, and the royal governor trying laid out a barbecue trying to placate the New Hanover militia. They were incidentally barbecuing a steer. They were cooking beef in those days, that occasion. But the Sons of Liberty were having none of this. They went to the barbecue and they poured out all the beer and threw the steer in the river. So this was the Wilmington barbecue 8 years earlier than the Boston Tea Party. And I think that it should be at least a state holiday, if not a national. we had a couple of politicians who told us had a couple of newspapers, including yours, that said they thought it was a good idea. A couple of politicians said they'd try to do something about it, but they lied. Politicians will do that. Friends of mine, but they didn't. They lied. So, it's still a possibility here, and I'm still trying to promote it. It's quite a story.
Well, unlike, say, the Mecklenburg Declaration of Independence, this actually happened.
That actually happened, yeah. One problem is they don't know the exact date. It was the end of April. So we proposed that last Monday in April be declared Wilmington Barbecue Day. If we had the actual date, we could put it on the state flag,
Mary, we got any more input from our viewers?
We do not, other than Suzanne clarifying that Parchees closed when David retired and sold the building. And she says he deserved a rest.
Oh man, I missed by chance.
I know, sorry, John.
But let me say a word about a couple things that are in this book, Ben, that people might find interesting. I mentioned the Ridgewood place in East Tennessee where they got this sauce that they invented after they went to Alabama. I've got a recipe for a facsimile of their sauce. Like so many sauces, the recipe is a closely guarded secret. But some ladies in Kingsport tried to imitate it and did a pretty good job. So I've got their recipe in here. It is a good sauce. I say it's what ketchup will taste like in heaven. And I've got another recipe in here, which is a barbecue cocktail. Some of your listeners might be interested in that because it's got Eastern North Carolina barbecue sauce in it. It sounds strange, sounds weird, but reflect that vinegar in barbecue sauces was actually a replacement for the lime juice that the Indians were using in the Caribbean because they didn't have many limes in the colonies, the mainland colonies. So they substituted vinegar. Well, think of this as a sort of whiskey sour with vinegar instead of lemon juice. And it's got a little heat to it, which your whiskey sour doesn't, but it's actually less bizarre than it sounds. It's a novelty, but I've actually drunk it more than once on purpose, not just for the experience.
Well, I recall among other of your adventures, at one time you collaborated with Bland Simpson and Doug Marlette on a musical version of the comic strip Kudzu.
Well, no, you're giving more credit than I had. I was listed as, I think it's a dramaturge.
But I just remember that has one, the Kudzu the musical was not exactly cats, but it had one wonderful line in it, which, as I remember, was something like, "Oh Lord, what a terrible loss! The whole world's out of barbecue sauce."
Yeah, it was a marvelous musical. It made it to Ford's Theater in Washington, but it never made it to New York. I think it may have been a little too regional for them. I wish somebody in Atlanta had enough regional pride to put that on repertoire. Some city in Atlanta, on some theater in Atlanta, so every tourist to Atlanta could go see this musical about kudzu and barbecue sauce. But that was written by Doug Marlette, who wrote the comic strip. It was based on Bland Simpson and Jack Herrick of the Red Clay Ramblers. And I had the job of explaining to the actors, who were mostly Yankees, why barbecue mattered. I got listed in the program as a dramaturg. So I'm proud of that. It's on my CV. Uh, lately, I've turned to writing songs, and one of them is I wrote too late to put in the book. I'd put it in if I'd written it in time, but it's sung to the tune of Heartaches by the Number, and it's called Cobwebs on the Woodpile. And cobwebs on the woodpile, propane tank out back. You say you're cooking barbecue, but there's one big thing you lack, and it goes on like that at length. Anyone who's interested can find the lyrics on my website, and also find a link to a karaoke version of Heartaches by the Number so they can sing it.
Well, I mean, I don't think it quite matches your song about the guy who found his wife with his best friend, and the refrain was, "My tears spoiled my aim."
Yeah, my tears spoiled my aim. That's why you're not dead. I put a bullet in the wall about 3 feet above your head. Yeah, that's one I wrote. Gave another one for equal time for ladies. It's called a 38 caliber divorce.
Oh dear.
Yeah.
All right.
And well, I've written a blues number, the cultural appropriation blues, called Appropriating the Blues. So, that's a little arcane. You have to be in humanities department to understand that.
Mary, do we have any more input, please?
Yes, we have another question from Frank. He asks if there's a particular wood used for barbecue. Is it regional? And can you talk about the wood?
Yeah, thank you, Frank. Appreciate having some questions, and that's a good one. Yes, there are. People tend to cook with what they have at hand. I mentioned the place on Ocracoke that's using fig wood because they've got a lot of fig trees growing wild there. In much of the South, the wood of choice is hickory, but in a good runner-up and used interchangeably in some places, and more than hickory in eastern North Carolina is oak. Texas, they use oak, but they also use mesquite sometimes. Now, people think of Texas barbecue is always cooked with mesquite. It's not. That's a very strong flavor. So you want to be careful with mesquite if you're buying wood chips to use in your cooking. But hickory fruit. Now, these are what restaurants use, and you could usually get a reliable supply of oak or hickory even. People cooking at home and competition barbecue people, that's another thing we could talk about, but let's not. Competition barbecue people and people cooking at home can use fruit woods. I had a apple tree that came down in an ice storm, so I had it cut up into little chunks and cooked with apple wood for a long time. It's very nice, but to tell you the truth, except for mesquite, the differences between these various hardwoods are pretty. It takes a discerning palate to really pick up on the differences. I think the big difference to my mind is between wood cooked barbecue and barbecue that's not cooked with wood. Incidentally, I said hardwood. One thing you want to avoid is any kind of softwood pine or something. You want to tasting like turpentine if you're not careful.
Okay. And are there any particular breeds of hog that are better than others?
Well, now that's an interesting question too. I wrote a bit about that in Holy Smoke. Somebody said once there's no food that he's familiar with where the ingredients you start with are so little considered. I mean, people don't pay a lot of attention to what kind of hog they're cooking, and in fact, the big difference here is between factory farmed hogs, commercially raised hogs, and pasture raised hogs. And pasture raised hogs cost a lot more.
Free range, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, I today as I speak, there's a food line a quarter mile from here, and you can get pork shoulders for 99 cents a pound. Well, go to Whole Foods or someplace and buy a pasture raised hog. They can tell you where it came from, probably tell you its name. It costs at least 3 times that, probably 4 times that. And I tend to cook pasture raised hogs, but I do it not so much because of the taste as because I have a soft spot for animals, and I know the conditions that factory raised hogs are raised in. But I cooked them side by side one time, and it was the taste after you cook it for 8 or 9 hours. The difference in taste I thought I could detect something, but I could have been imagining it. And if I were running a restaurant, and I have friends who do this, I couldn't possibly use the high price product, and my $3.50 sandwich would cost 4 times as much. It just and my customers would all leave me. I've got a friend who runs a barbecue restaurant who understands this and said he would cook with it if he could afford it, and he will cook pasture-raised hogs when he's catering. If he's doing a wedding reception and folks are willing to pay for it, he'll happily cook that. But day to day in his restaurant, he can't afford it, and I can understand that. It's a shame. Maybe if the price pasture-raised hogs comes down, as it may, when it gets to be more common, maybe we'll see more.
All right, Mary, is this about it? Any more questions?
Well, I actually have 2 more short ones,
you
though.
Oh, good.
Oh, sorry. Am I muted still?
No.
You're
Okay.
on. We can hear you now.
Frank again, and he asked, can chicken ever be called barbecue?
Yeah, that's a really, I've got a piece in here about the sort of linguistics of barbecue. And barbecue, the noun in North Carolina these days means pork. Okay. We speak of barbecued chicken, but not chicken barbecue. Think about that. So, barbecuing as a technique can be applied to anything. Have barbecued tofu, barbecued chicken, barbecued turkey. But barbecue as a noun typically means the most common barbecue wherever you are. So in Texas, barbecue could be beef. Barbecue can be sausage, could be ribs. In North Carolina, it's pork. But just ask yourself if the word barbecue can be used as a noun in connection with whatever you're cooking. If it is, that's barbecue. If you have to use the adjective barbecued, probably not. This may be changing. Incidentally, I mentioned turkey. This may be changing with turkey because barbecued turkey is more and more common, particularly down your way, particularly in Black communities. Folks concerned about their health in some cases. Folks have religious problems with pork in other cases. So increasingly you're getting barbecued turkey, and I think some people are starting to call it turkey barbecue, and keep your eye on that one. I've eaten it. There's a place here in our area that serves both pork and turkey. And it's not as good as pork, but it's not bad.
Oh, good. Well, that also leads to what looks like our last question here, which is, how did barbecue get its name?
I mentioned this apparatus that these Caribbean Indians were cooking on that they called a barbacoa. They used it actually as a word for any kind of raised platform. They had raised platforms that they slept on, and those were barbacoas. They had raised platforms they cooked on, those were barbacoas. But the Spanish heard that word, and it passed into Spanish, barbacoa. And then it passed from there into English as barbecue. I say I've got an essay in this book about the emergence of that and changes in the meaning of that word. Barbacoa, incidentally, that's coming back into our lives again, this time from Mexico. If you go to a Mexican place, you may find barbacoa, which is typically beef. And in South Texas, it's typically beef heads. They cook beef heads in a pit for a long time and then strip it. Around here, it's not so much cabeza. It's not beef heads, it's beef, but it's cooked for a long time. It's pulled basically, and it's got a sauce on it. I think it's called barbacoa, same word, been through a different evolution.
And there's sort of a link here. We had a lot of shipwrecked sailors in the Caribbean doing barbecuing and with beef, and in the French nomenclature they became boucaniers, which
that's right.
And when they developed other habits when they weren't cooking, this led to a whole different word.
It did. Yeah, they cooked with a thing called a boucan, and boucanier. Yeah, boucanier became buccaneers, and I think East Carolina University missed a great opportunity to call themselves the Buccaneers instead of the Pirates, because that would have tied right back to barbecue if they thought about it.
Anyway, well, John, thank you very much for your time. We appreciate it. Please keep eating, and please keep us apprised of what's fitting. We will be back next month with I'm afraid, a rather different book. Heather Freese from Raleigh will be talking with us about her first novel, The Best Little Girl in the World, which is more or less about growing up on Hatteras Island, which is fairly interesting. So thank you, John, and thank you, Mary and WHQR, for giving us the opportunity to sound off here this evening.
Thank you, Ben. It's always good to see you. And Mary,
Thank
thank
you,
you.
guys.
Live
It's a
long and
pleasure.
prosper, folks.
Have a good night, everyone. Thanks for joining us.
Bye.